Good morning, thank you for coming, thank you for asking me. I hope you don't mind if I sit down, I've got these knees, you see. That's why I didn't go on the walk yesterday. Aaron has very kindly sort of more or less given you the first part of my talk, which is jolly good from my point of view. In fact, you've more or less done the whole talk. So. But the point is, you see, as far as I'm concerned, metaphysics, which is this grand word, is what underpins our worldview. As far as I can see, metaphysics is about what the universe is really like, and what we are really like, and how we should fit into the universe. So it underpins science, and it underpins morality, and it underpins our entire view of the world. And we can't get anything right unless we get the metaphysics right. That seems to be the obvious. And as Aaron said, we can't possibly get agriculture right unless we actually have the right kind of worldview, unless we look at the world the way it really is, and unless we look at ourselves as we really are. And I'm going to come on to in a minute just to describe very briefly how really, really bad present agriculture is. I mean, we're being told from on high at every minute that it's brilliant and everything's in hand, and it's all being done well, and it's all being done benignly, and there's going to be 9 billion of us in 30 years' time, but 40 years' time, but don't worry because the powers that be are in charge and they've got it all under control, provided we behave ourselves. This is the message that's coming from on high. And the reality is that the world is in a very, very dire state, and that the kind of stuff, the kind of policies that are coming from on high are disastrous, and in fact they're the main cause of our problems, because we needn't have these problems. And what seems to me to be underpinning the really disastrous policies is the metaphysics, the worldview that prevails among the people who now dominate the world and who now make the kind of policies that have produced present-day agriculture and everything else. But I mean, we happen to be talking about agriculture, and agriculture, of course, is of absolutely crucial importance to human beings and to all other species. It's the greatest determinant of whether other species survive as well as ourselves. And the present worldview is a disaster. And I've just written down the sort of what I think are the main components of what you might call not the prevailing worldview. This isn't necessarily what most people think, but it's what, as it were, informs the policies that come down to us from on high. And I'd say, first of all, the prevailing worldview of the present government and the American government and so on, the Russian government, the people that dominate, is entirely materialist. It just says, as Lucretius did a long time ago, there is nothing in the universe except atoms and the void. Not only that, it is logical positivist, which logical positivism came on board about 100 years ago, and basically it said that any idea that you cannot pin down absolutely, where you cannot make absolutely sort of repeatable, reliable observations, and you cannot then do maths and subject it to a testable hypothesis which you test with maths, is not worth thinking about, actually literally meaningless. So the logical positivists virtually wrote off the whole of metaphysics at a stroke. And nowadays it's become fashionable to suppose, thanks to people like Dawkins, that science is the sort of natural parent of atheism, that atheism must come out of science. Science is of course materialist, because science is very good at handling things that have to do with direct observation and with maths, so it's bound to be very materialist. It doesn't have to be logical positivist. It doesn't have to say, because we can do materialism well, materialism is all there is. It doesn't have to say that, but people like Dawkins do. And they are not only materialists, they are also logical positivists, and out of that comes atheism and complete dismissal of what one might call metaphysics. So the second thing is that, given that the universe is just stuff, there is no suggestion in there that there could be any mind in the universe, or any mind behind the universe, or any purpose in the universe. There's no purpose in stuff, it's just stuff. Coupled with that, there's an idea that goes back at least to Descartes, which says that other creatures, other animals, are simply machines. They're very complicated machines, but they're just machines. And although they may look as if they're doing emotion and all that kind of stuff, they may look as if they're thinking, this is just anthropomorphism. Machines could look like that too. But don't be fooled by it, they're just machines. And then we have Darwinism, which tells us that nature is incredibly competitive and that we are all competitive, that life works by us competing with each other and with other creatures. And let's actually not, it's not necessarily what Darwin said, but it's what people understand what Darwin said. And behind Darwin actually lies Tennyson, who talked about nature red in tooth and claw. And this is part of the modern metaphysics, filtered through Darwin. And then, as I said, the whole thing is, no, I didn't say that, I'm about to say. The prevailing worldview is entirely anthropocentric. In other words, it says the only creatures in the universe that are sentient are human beings. Only the sentient creatures are worth worrying about because the rest don't know what's happening anyway, so only human beings count. And then you put the whole of this together and you can see that the prevailing worldview says that we have a perfect right to manipulate the structure of the world exactly the way we want to do it, for our own benefit. There's no reason to do anything else, but it's only stuff, it doesn't care, and animals don't care, so we can muck about with them as well. But because, though, we are also, besides being anthropocentric, also very, very competitive, according to the modern worldview, we don't actually need to worry about other people either, because really we're in competition with them. So we have a view of the world which is entirely anthropocentric, entirely materialistic, and yet says, well, most human beings don't matter either, because it's only our own in-group that matters. And this is the prevailing worldview. And this idea that we have the right to fiddle with the universe as we like, because it's just stuff, is coupled with the idea, because we have such faith in science, that we have the ability to do this. That, our science will make us omniscient, so that we can understand perfectly how the universe works. And I've often heard scientists talking in this vein, will we soon have physics completely sewn up? Will we soon have a grand unified theory that explains absolutely everything? Is biology just, molecular biology plus Darwin plus genetics? This kind of view, total world view, absolute knowledge. And out of the conceit that we can have omniscience comes the idea of omnipotence, that anything we can control, that we can understand absolutely, we can also control absolutely. And out of this comes the idea that all we need is enough technology to be able to control the world to do anything we absolutely like. And out of this comes the idea that all you need is enough money to spend on the technology. So what you've got to do is make lots of money so you can have the technology so you can fiddle about with the world and make it do exactly what you like. And everybody, for example, this is just an example, but gave a lot of praise to Nicholas Stern in his report a few years ago when he was talking about climate change. And he said, if you spend N trillion pounds on the technology, we can control climate change. And the Economist thought this was terrific because he put a figure on the money you need to spend, and now they can think clearly about what we should do and what we shouldn't do. But that assumption that we understood climate change well enough to be able to control it, and that we have the technology that can do it, and that if only we spend enough money we will do it, is, when you think about it, ludicrous. And yet, as far as I can see, the world at large, certainly the powers that be, said, what a brilliant report, Nicholas, you've brought us all down to earth, you've shown how we can put an economic value on this thing which is about to kill us all. And you could say that out of this kind of general, what do you call it, world view, comes a modern view of what progress actually is. And I reckon, progress, you listen to people like Obama talking in Westminster the other day, and you think that progress means westernization, and that westernization means more democracy and more freedom and more prosperity and all those lovely things. If you actually look just past the surface of these, I think progress as defined or as implicit in the modern metaphysic underpins the modern worldview. There are three components really, and the first of those is commodification. And commodification is a horrible word which I think I made up. So what it means is that you regard the world as stuff, which, it's just stuff. And because it's just stuff, you can treat it as a resource. And because it's just, and we use the word resource all the time, and because it's a resource, the job of our job is to turn the resource, which is a raw material, into a commodity, which is something you can sell. In other words, progress, which leads to prosperity, is the process of taking the fabric of the earth and our fellow creatures and turning them into money by treating them as commodities. That's component one. That's component one of modern progress. Component two is you keep this all under control. You document everything you do at every stage. In other words, component two of progress is bureaucratization. And the third component of what we in fact seem to mean by progress, or the powers that do mean by progress, is centralization. In other words, not only do we commodify everything, but we control everything, but we make sure that only a few people are actually in control of the whole process. And the people, of course, who are actually in control of the process are the people who are best at turning resources into money, and they, of course, as it happens, are the corporates. And if you look at the present government policy of the coalition government, what are they actually saying in all fields, and especially in agriculture, is we'll hand it all over to the corporates. Let the corporates fill their boots. Let Tesco fill their boots. Let Monsanto fill their boots. And somehow or other, everything will work out okay. There are, of course, huge gaps between what the corporates can do, because the corporates can only do what makes lots of money. So there are gaps. I mean, the bits that you might call civilization are in the gaps. But never mind, we've got this thing called, what's it called, the big society, where we, without any help from anybody else, are going to fill in the gaps between the corporates. That is basically the modern worldview as applied. And naturally coming out of this is this horrible thing called neoliberal economics, which is the global market, maximally competitive, the whole aim of which is to make them more money than anybody else, more quickly than anybody else. And when you hear secretaries of state in Britain, we heard it from Hilary Benn, who was supposed to be a socialist, for goodness sake, we certainly hear it from Caroline Spellman. They talk about things like this food security is this new word they've invented, but no, two words in fact. But they always say, well, first of all, we've got to probably produce more food of our own, but then they say, but we've got to be competitive. In other words, we've got to produce more food of our own, but only if we can do it more cheaply than the Brazilians. The Brazilians are also being told they've got to produce more stuff to turn into commodities to sell to us, but only if they can do it more cheaply than us. So basically the Brazilians and everybody else in the so-called third world, they use their sunshine, which is nice and cheap, and their space, which is nice and cheap, which they increase by cutting down forest, and their labour, which is very, very nice and cheap, and we use high technology, which basically depends on oil, to compete with them. I mean, what an incredible nonsense. Out of this comes the most incredible injustice. People, which is manifest, for example, in the suicides among farmers, among other things. 200,000 suicides in Indian farmers in the last 12 years alone. That's in India alone. And it also happens in Britain, it also happens in New Zealand, it happens in America, it happens in rich countries as well as the
What, suicides?
Suicides.
In Britain?
Oh yeah, lots. Among farmers, yes. And the 200,000 in India, incidentally, doesn't include women, because women in the bureaucratic system are classified as farmers' wives, even though they actually do most of the farming. So when they commit suicide, they go in a different column, and it makes the whole figures look much better. And that is the injustice to people and the cruelty to animals. I mean, I'm sure you've discussed this, but factory farming and all that kind of stuff is just ridiculous. At the same time, this system that comes out of this neoliberal view of the economy is selling us horribly short, so that we have a population of 7 billion, and 1 billion of those 7 billion are now estimated to be chronically undernourished. Another 1 billion of those lot are said to be chronically overnourished, so that diabetes, for example, is now, well, epidemic. Everybody agrees it's just epidemic. And 1 billion live in urban slums, and knock-on effect our fellow creatures. About 50% of all our fellow species, that's about 4 million species out of 8 million, are now considered to be in realistic danger of extinction, probably within the next 100 years. That's half. That's the fastest mass extinction ever. And yet, I suggest, if we only farmed properly, and that actually is the theme of the book, which you'll find on sale, in the lobby, called Good Food for Everyone Forever, if only we did things properly, we could actually feed ourselves easily, we could provide enough good food for everybody forever, and we could do it without wrecking the rest of the world. But we don't. So, what actually do we have to do to feed everybody in the world well forever without wrecking the rest? And it's all explained in my book, but in a nutshell, at the moment, agriculture is designed, it is not actually designed to feed people. Agriculture at the moment is designed to maximize wealth for the people who run it. And the idea is that if you maximize wealth somehow or other, enough food will be produced for everybody. It doesn't actually work, as I've just been suggesting. And so it's designed purely on what are called economic lines, which are quite arbitrary, but they are in fact neoliberal economic lines. If we're serious about feeding people, we actually have to recognise that providing enough food for everybody without wrecking the rest is a problem with biology, and we have to design agriculture along biological lines. And to do that, and we have to say to ourselves, look, if we're going to feed 9 billion people, we need to be productive. Of course we do. We need to produce quite a lot of food. We also need to be sustainable. We need to be able to go on doing this effectively forever. So we need it for the next 1,000 years, the next 10,000, the next million years. There is no good biological reason why the human species shouldn't be here in a million years' time. Although as things are, many of us will be lucky to be, many people are saying we'll be lucky to get through the next century in a tolerable state, the way things are. But we should be thinking about the next million years. And the last thing we have to be is resilient. Because resilience isn't the same as sustainability. Sustainability means you have to be able to go on doing it. But resilience means you have to be able to change direction as conditions change. And we know that the conditions are changing. We know, for example, spectacularly, that global warming is happening, the climate is changing. And we have to be able to change direction in agriculture quite radically and quite quickly. If we treat this as a biological problem, we might say, well, let's look for a biological precedent, and all you have to do is look at nature itself. How does nature do it? Because nature has been pretty damn productive for the last 3.8 billion years without interruption, which makes it pretty damn sustainable. And it has done this even though the climate has gone from being pole-to-pole tropics to being pole-to-pole ice, and back again several times. It always manages to come through, it always manages to be versatile. And how does it do it? How does it actually do it? And it does it first of all by being very, very diverse. And you can have arguments about whether diversity leads to productivity and whether it leads to sustainability. And some ecologists say, no, it doesn't, there's no simple relationship. But actually, if you argue it through, you see, of course, there's a relationship. And the diversity of nature absolutely matters. That's what gives it its power and its strength. And the second thing is it's very, very beautifully integrated. So there's no waste in nature. One creature dies, another gobbles it up, and so on and so on and so on. And then it is low input. The ecosystem more or less relies on the inputs that are there. All ecosystems borrow from other ecosystems, but on the whole, they use what's there. So we want to, if we're going to have agriculture that imitates nature and is productive, sustainable, and resilient, what do we have to do? We want agriculture that is very, very diverse. In other words, actually that translates into mixed farms. Mixed farms. And mixed farms doesn't mean that you simply keep a lot of livestock and a lot of different kinds of crops, like animals in a zoo or like plants in a botanic garden, where they're all separate, where they're all just doing their own thing. It means an integrated system, so the actual farm becomes a kind of ecosystem. And I reckon we've got farmers in this room, so they can disagree or not, but I reckon some of the best examples of this were in Britain, say, in the 1950s, when we were devising very beautifully integrated farms with dairy and arable and horticulture and pigs and sheep, all together in often quite small farms of 100 acres or less than 100 acres. And that was a model of biological efficiency. And the third thing is, if you want to reduce the inputs, which of course you do want to reduce, then I'm not going to say that organic farming is the be-all and end-all and rules as they stand are the answer, but they are the best exemplar of what can be done. And the organic farmers have been carrying the flag, as it were, of sensible farming for the last 40 odd years. And so I would say that not that we should all run out and sign up to the Soil Association. You're already organic here anyway. But that organic farming worldwide should be the default position. It should, as a matter of course, be what farmers do, unless there is a very good reason to do something else. Now, if you have mixed farms which are tightly integrated and are low input, in other words organic, they are going to be very, very complicated. If they're complicated, they've got to be labour intensive, certainly by modern standards, they've got to be labour intensive. If they're labour-intensive and complicated, there's no advantage in scale-up. If there's no advantage in scale-up, then you finish up with the idea that what we actually need to feed the world is mixed, labour-intensive, small to medium-sized farms. This is what biology tells you. This isn't ideology, this isn't nostalgia, this is what the biology tells you. Now the modern policy, which is industrial farming, geared to the neoliberal economy, is the absolute opposite of that. The neoliberal economy, industrial model of agriculture, says no, the aim is to make as much money as possible in the shortest possible time, using whatever resources are available, provided they're cheap. And if you do that, you've got to maximise productivity, maximise yield, even though we don't actually need to increase the yield that much more than it is already. We're already producing as much food as we need, in fact. Nevertheless, the emphasis always is on more output the whole time. And it's more fertiliser on the fields to produce even bigger yields from wheat, no matter what the collateral damage is. It's more yield from cows, so that we now have cows that routinely, in some herds, are producing 2,000 gallons of milk a year, which is about 7 or 8 times more than a wild cow would produce, which is about 2 or 2.5 times more than a traditional cow in a small herd would produce. They've got udders like this, they get mastitis. The average herd life, I think, in this country for a dairy cow is 1.8 lactations, which means they die at the age of 3, or they're slaughtered at the age of 3 with mastitis and bad feet and God knows what. Whereas traditionally kept cows sometimes will get through 10 lactations, slaughtered at the age of 12, etc., etc. Wild cows can live for 15 years. So this is the kind of pressure we're putting on livestock in the course of productivity. And the second thing you need to do if you really want to make money out of farming is to add value, so we have all this nonsense of packaging, and this is actually the reason why people nowadays produce so much meat, because it's a way of turning cheap fodder, including grain, which we could perfectly well be eating ourselves, into something very, very expensive. It's an exercise in value adding, it's not an exercise in nutrition and gastronomy, as we are told. But the third thing you have to do if you want to make maximum money out of farming is to simplify, is to cut labour. And if you cut labour, first of all, you have to simplify the husbandry. So the idea of a complex system of the kind that we need goes right out of the window, because you can't possibly have all that labour, because it's too expensive. So we find these huge monocultures. In Lincolnshire, for example, it's common to find one person full-time on a farm of 1,000 hectares, 2,000 acres, which previously, 100 years ago, might have employed 200 or 300 farm workers. But get rid of the labour is the best way to save money. And if you're going to do all these things and you use loads and loads of oil, loads and loads of engineering, loads and loads of industrial chemistry to make up for the fact that the husbandry is so simple, and if you're going to farm in this very, very simplified way, you have the farms as big as possible, because you get tremendous advantages in scale up. So you have this huge, monocultures that go as far as the eye can see. In order to consolidate, to centralise the control of these things, you introduce technologies like GMOs, and you make it necessary for people to buy their seed from a few companies, and you have the EU reducing the number of varieties that can be sown, and so on and so on and so on. Scale up, money, centralisation, that's what it's all about. It happens to be the case that agriculture the world over is by far the biggest employer. I think something like 40% of everybody in the world works in agriculture. Half the people in the world live still on the land, and most of them are engaged in agriculture. So if other countries followed our lead and reduced the labour in the way that we have, we've now got 1% of people on the land in this country, 1% full-time farmers of the labour force. If other countries followed our example, you'd have something like 2 billion people out of work. You'd have 500 million people, 500 million people out of work in India alone, if they followed our example. And yet Western governments are actually actively encouraging third world governments to follow our lead. And they say that they're very stupid and so on, and if they don't. Now you might say, why, if it's so easy to feed people actually, which I think it is if you do it properly, why don't they do that? And the answer is, in the short term, because they are in fact committed to the neoliberal economy and the idea you've got to make money and all that kind of stuff. But I would say the deeper reason why they don't change direction is because they don't have an appropriate worldview. They don't have the right metaphysics. They've forgotten what metaphysics is. And there's a quite different way of looking at the world. And you don't actually have to say that the world is just stuff. I mean, the idea to me is crucial. It's the idea of transcendence. And transcendence, in a very crude nutshell, is the idea that there is, in fact, more to the universe than meets the eye, and that the material stuff that we can touch and measure and stub our toes on is, as it were, the surface of things. I mean, it seems to me to be a crucial issue that runs right through all religions, for example, the notion that there's more going on. And embedded in the idea that there's more going on is the idea that actually the universe isn't mindless, it isn't purposeless, but actually has consciousness embedded within it. And this kind of crude version of Darwinism, which says that all life is driven by competition to the death, nature red in tooth and claw, it doesn't square with what one sees if one looks more carefully at nature. You see that in nature is far more cooperative than it is competitive. And if that were not the case, actually life would fall apart. Life would be quite impossible. And you could say, competition happens, but cooperation is actually the essence of the whole damn thing, actually. And as for this idea that we can understand everything and therefore we can control everything, this is total nonsense. I mean, there is just huge... Anyone that knows anything about the philosophy of science knows that science takes a very, very limited view of what the world is like. And that's why it's so successful. It defines the questions it's going to look at very, very carefully. And once you begin to see that science is limited, you begin to see that there's a huge limit, there's an obvious limit to what we can know about the world if we just do science. And more generally than that, we can say there is an obvious limit to what we can know about the world, full stop, whatever line we go down. We also say to ourselves, if we want to get a better view of the world than science can give us, then we have to rely on methods that are not purely scientific, and not in fact purely rational. And not being rational doesn't mean being irrational, which means being mad. It simply means not relying totally on these kind of logical processes. In other words, you have to rely much more heavily on intuition. In other words, you have to cultivate intuition in order to get some sense of what the universe is really like. And if you take all these ideas, the essential benignity of the world and the essential mysteriousness of the universe, and the idea of transcendence and the idea of cooperativeness, I think out of this emerges a very, very simple ethic, which I suggest is not just me suggesting it, other people have suggested, is the essence of all the ethics that underpins all the great religions. The idea of humility, because the world is really seriously beyond our ken. The idea of respect, because it is a sentient universe, for goodness sake, it needs to be treated respectfully. And the idea of reverence, because what else can you do when you're surrounded by this except feel this sense of reverence for nature. Now it seems to me that if you had this view of life, the transcendence and mystery and all the other things, and reverence for respect for other creatures and reverence for the world as a whole, we simply wouldn't dream of farming the way we now farm. We wouldn't treat animals as commodities. We'd find it obscene. We wouldn't be hacking down rainforests in order to grow a bit more soil in order to make more pigs, and all those things we do. We wouldn't be allowing 1 billion people to be hungry when it's not necessary. We wouldn't be treating animals with tremendous cruelty, etc. We wouldn't be wiping out half our fellow species. It isn't a question of making laws or adjusting the economy to prevent these things happening. I mean, it is that, but it isn't just that. It's actually a question that these things should be unthinkable to us. Just unthinkable. We couldn't do them any more than we could countenance, just out and out murder. It would not be something that we could encompass. And yet, because we've got no metaphysics, because we've got this crude view of how the world really is, this has become the norm. So I think the kind of thing you're talking about, Aaron, is of absolutely fundamental importance, and thank you very much.